Get the conversation going, and I will periodically just ask if anyone has questions, and we can bring a microphone to you. So do please kind of join in the conversation, because it is fascinating, and something a lot of you have raised is the possibility that we won't make the most of it. I guess that there might be perhaps culture clashes between the sort of big infrastructure people and the technology people, and is everyone talking to each other, and it's all going to go to waste. Brian, I know you've done some work in this, haven't you? What the issues are with us being productive and with us sort of improving things for the future. What do you think the barriers are? Do you think there is a bit of a cultural problem in that we're used to building big roads and we're not used to dealing with sort of modern technology?
Yeah, I think so. And I mentioned it earlier, from Egan to Latham, everyone knows what the issues are, and various recommendations have been made, for example, in major projects to improve productivity, etc. But we're still where we were 10 years ago. And so you have to understand, or try to understand really, what are the factors behind that lack of productivity and what is causing that resistance to change. It's not a lack of intelligence or intellectual capability in the sector. It's not a lack of understanding of technologies. It could be argued that it's almost willful resistance to change because of the way our business models work. And as an ex-consultant, I want to say this, but if you go into the asset management field, asset management as a sort of coherent philosophy has been around for a long time. In Highways England, if you talk to them about asset management, they'll say, yes, we've got an asset management strategy, but when you scrape underneath the surface, you'll find there's 42 GIS systems that don't talk to each other. You'll see that asset management doesn't actually, in different organisations that I've looked at, really feature BIM, and BIM and asset management don't talk to each other. So in many organisations, not in all. And so there's a combination really of client-side reluctance sometimes to embrace innovation, bring it out from the contractors, and from the contractors, for example, to talk to each other's products and actually push that into the market. And from consultancies who prefer to put bums on seats, quite frankly, and have revenue-driven spreadsheets rather than automating some of their asset management decisions, for example. So that inherent resistance to change is possibly down to fragmentation, the way the physical network is fragmented, the different types of client, the lack of a coherent policy at the top level, because of the political cycle, and because also of the funding sort of issues. So I see us actually approaching a cliff edge. And for me, the best approach is the people in this industry to be galvanized into action to start to that reform from within, as well as have it imposed upon them. But until we start understanding what those reasons are in the surveys that we've done and for that resistance to change, then we're not going to move anywhere. And it will be great to have these talking lampposts. And congestion in the next 25 years is going to quadruple, according to the DFT. So you can be in your autonomous car and you can have all the infrastructure you want, but you're still going to get stuck in congestion. So for me, there's some principles there that we need to examine.
Brian, you work for a big company. How open are you to sort of ideas and innovation? Are you sort of testing out new ideas all the time? Do small companies approach you and say, have you thought about this, have you thought about that?
And within MOTS, I mean, we work across lots of different industries. We're quite global. So there's lots of good pockets of information that we have where we're looking at with the petrochemical industry. We do a lot of BIM modeling with them. And we're trying to replicate that within the highways. So there's a good lot of sort of information that we can glean from other different industries to bring in and help support the way forward within highways.
What's the Fujitsu perspective on this? Because you presumably have to deal with governments and sort of people in big organisations, public organisations, and yet that wouldn't be the way that Fujitsu worked. Well, what's it actually like? Is there a clash of cultures between technology people and civil engineering people?
So I'm not so sure I sense a clash of cultures between the parties that you mentioned. I do sense that there's a kind of clash of expectations between people in the industry now and the consumers of the industry in the very near future. Yeah. I think lots of the stuff that occupies us, when we talk about BIM, for example, or asset management, we're talking about optimizing existing assets. We're not really looking towards a future state. I think if we were really progressive, we wouldn't seek to tweak around the edges of the infrastructure that we've got at the moment. We'd seek progressive solutions to go and I don't know, not just optimize the transport network for the capacity that we need right now, but if it was transformative and it could help us deliver a much more active economy in the UK, what transport network do we need? What connectivity do we need? What industries are there in point A and point B that need connecting? And I sense, probably similar to the cliff edge that Brian discusses, but I sense a pent-up demand that says, by the way, if it carries on like this, I'm fed up. I'll go and do something dramatically different. And it's garage developers that will deliver those different things.
Steve, why do you think there is this sort of reluctance to be innovative? You know, the RAC Foundation is always looking ahead, trying to get people to think in different ways. Do you find a resistance to change when you go and talk to people?
I think one of the big things in this picture is, I would say, it's very similar to the distinction between enhancing the road network by building a wider road or a new road and carrying on with the maintenance of the existing network. So for many, many years, before we got into this debate about clever technology and the use of data, I think many of us worried a bit that most of the policy attention was, where should we build a bypass? Where should we widen the road? And frankly, speaking as someone who's had to brief ministers and senior officials on that, it's very easy to explain, but because you can say, here's the road, here's the traffic forecast, if we made it that wide, it would be better. And everyone can get that straight away. Making the case for maintenance, we've struggled with, I think, over years, but it's a similar issue here. What we need to do is, not so much, if we focus too much on the silos and we focus too much on the constraints, I think we'll miss the fact that we haven't got the compelling story that says, if you went down this path, this is where it would take you. And then once you start getting the customer pull, both from individual users of the network and from the politicians, then if they're then hitting against silos, they're hitting against commercial constraints, they'll say to people like my successors in the DFT, how are we going to get past that then? I think that's where we need to go.
Isn't the reality, though, that if you work in a council or you work for the government, or you have immediate priorities? You've got people in your ear saying you've got to fix that road, you've got to build a new road there. They haven't got time to be innovative because it all happens long after they're out of office.
Well, I draw a distinction between, certainly in this country, and I would say this, wouldn't I? But ministers come and go. That just happens. I've worked for a lot of transport secretaries. But we call it the permanent civil service for a reason, even though that moves around quite a bit. But I do think it's important that anyone who's advising, for example, Chris Grayling is, I believe, at this very minute, sitting in his office thinking about where to build a new Lower Thames crossing. And I think it's important that the discussion he's having is with people who are giving him a bigger picture about what he should be trying to achieve in that part of the country, and not taking a very technocratic view of, well, here's one crossing and it's overloaded, why don't we just build another one over there? And I think it is incumbent on people, and it's incumbent on us, to work with, for example, Innovate UK, who are explicitly out there fostering innovation, to make sure that is coming back into the minds of the officials and the officers, like, I'm looking out here, like Martin, like Derek, sitting up the back there, so that we get a much clearer idea amongst the people who are advising the policy decision makers about what the art of the possible is becoming.
Carla, we're talking about innovation. You deal with innovators all the time. Is there frustration out there at people sort of understanding modern ideas? I'm interested as well, the people coming to you, do they tend to be younger people? Are you getting innovators, frankly, middle-aged men like me, or does it tend to be younger people? So perhaps there's even a clash of generations there. What kind of people are pitching ideas to you?
I think there are a variety. Yes, it does tend to be that particular sector that you mentioned, and that's something that we are quite aware of at Innovate UK at the moment. We do, touching on a point that you mentioned about the younger generation, we do have a project with the younger generation at the moment, but I think it's something that we need to nurture more and more. If you think about especially in this area that we're talking about, the younger generation, they don't want driving lessons anymore. They want the latest smartphone or the latest gadget. So there's this shift into technology, and we really need to understand that. So why aren't they traveling, or how are they communicating, or how are they going about their day-to-day stuff? And as a result of that, we need to understand that. And it would be great if it wasn't middle-aged men, for example, or women, doing that kind of project. It would be great if those people themselves were coming to us with their ideas, and that's something that I would love to see more and more.
Do you pick up frustration from the people that come to you, though? They don't know where to go. They've got this great idea. They have no idea who to pitch it to.
Absolutely.
Doors closed from companies.
Absolutely. Some of them just don't know where to start. Some of them are just frustrated and they need some support to get to that next stage, or they need to connect into somebody else. And I think from what we're seeing, it's not really a case of people not wanting to change, this reluctance to innovate, to be innovative. I think it's more a case of seeing the wood for the trees. So if you think about transport again at the moment, going back to, as you were saying, all the changes that have happened over the years, we're not just talking about transport organisations anymore. You can't do what we want to do without telecommunications and finance and insurance and all of the other areas, and bringing those all together, it's a minefield and it's complicated. So that's something we can try and support people with, but it's difficult and it's scary for people, which puts them off. So
words I've heard a lot this week: silo, collaboration. It seems to be no matter what your area of expertise, that's an issue. Does anyone have a question from the audience at all? Put your hand up. Yes. Sorry, if we can get a microphone to the front here. Someone with a microphone. Oh, here we go. Excuse the pause. And then come to you afterwards. Yeah.
I just wanted to follow up on Steve's point about the compelling narrative, and I'm just kind of also reflecting on some of the presentation points about how the support and the app and the focus on apps is going to continue. And I'm just thinking, if we fast forward or rewind back 10 years, then the compelling narrative wouldn't have had Apple's iPhone or Android. So how do we deal with the fact that there is this uncertainty, there is this change, and actually the drivers of those change, or the agents of change, are actually probably nowhere near the audience that's at this event?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. Russell and I were talking about, we won't mention Uber, but I remember at the conference last year, everyone was sort of rabbit in the headlights about Uber and where it was all going and what it would mean. No one knew. So how do we try to predict these sort of, small, fast-moving tech companies in California, presumably, that could change everything, the slip of an app?
So I'm not sure we have to try and predict. I think that might be the problem. So if we try and anticipate the change that is the change that those guys are going to invent, aren't we doomed to fail? I guess in one strand of my job, what I'd quite like to do is make sure that the UK is the right sort of environment where the next, God, I don't want to use that word, that next app developer that's going to develop the app that is over in German, whatever that is in Japanese. But wouldn't it be great if we could create the environment for that developer to be in a house in Manchester or Liverpool or Birmingham or in the UK rather than in Silicon Valley? And I think the question is, how do you create the environment that they're going to be able to do it here, have a terrific impact on the UK economy, I hope. So you break down what the successful companies are doing. They are finding new ways to manipulate data sets. A bit of a boring mantra, but we've got to find ways to enable them to bring those data together. It's open APIs in the techie world, open application programming interfaces, have enabled people to break down supply chains into distinct components and bring them together in new ways. And if there's one thing I would advocate that government did, it would be to enable that to happen, to foster the environment for the developers to sit in, not try and anticipate what the innovation is. Does that answer the question? I don't think we should be saying, let's plan for this thing. I think we have to create the environment that makes it more likely that the sparkle is going to happen.
Yeah, I'll throw this. Yeah, Steve.
Can I add two thoughts to that? Because I think one of them I share. So one of them is my 19-year-old son passed his driving test this morning. So, round of applause.
Did you teach him?
No.
And why are we clapping?
We're clapping because I didn't teach him, which is another story entirely. His mother said, no, that would be a very bad idea. No, my point is this. My 19-year-old has passed his driving test, and at the moment, he can only see how he can achieve the lifestyle he wants, which involves travelling widely to play basketball if he can drive himself and have access to, let's think of it as today, a personal vehicle. He thinks mine, but we'll park that thought. But if we could move and actually engage him in a discussion about what sort of lifestyle he wants. He's not going to come to events like this, he just isn't. So those of us coming up with the policy advice have got to find ways of going to that next generation and finding ways to draw out of them what your 8-year-old daughter actually fancies the world being like, or indeed, how do we see England's economic heartland looking? What we'd like it to be like? What sort of lifestyles would we like to have? And then maybe people coming up with bright ideas might be able to see both brilliant solutions and commercial opportunities because they understand what it is we're after. Because ultimately, if we take ourselves back to one of those big leap moments, when the iPad was flourished first to the unsuspecting world, broadly speaking, the unsuspecting world, particularly the tech world, yawned cavernously and said, but it's not a telephone. Why would I want that? Turns out, he was right, but he was taking a bit of a punt on, I think people are going to like this, from a sense of what sort of lifestyle he thought people would like to have.
What we can be certain about is that there's an amount of finite capacity that we have to provide for whoever's going to use the network. So funding the way we maintain that network beyond 2020 is going to be absolutely critical. So my children would be oblivious to who, why, and how these networks are provided and maintained. They just want to use them when they can. So for me, the fundamentals to understanding the future is to predict the environment and to be as flexible and agile enough as we can in terms of offering that travel choice, which will be on your watch or whatever it might be. And as I said before, I think that the change is coming, and I think we've got the opportunity to start to think about funding. Others are looking at it already, the Wolfson Prize. You know, we will pay for roads more directly, I think. That's my prediction. And that's going to drive a set of behaviours and other interactions in the industry that we need to be aware of. And for me, the service providers in the industry are going to have to adapt to that or move out of roads or whatever. So it's going to be a lot smaller, a lot more intelligent, a lot more agile, our industry, and it's going to be funded directly.
So it seems to be, yeah.
I think, like trying to predict the future or apps and things like that, is that we probably all accept that we're going to have autonomous cars sometime in the future, but the real challenge will be is getting to that position, and that's where we really got to sort of look at those challenges and look at those or be adaptive to semi-autonomous cars, to look at legislation, to look at the insurance, of how we go from that transition from where we are now. You know, I can imagine our children or great-grandchildren will laugh at us and think, you actually drove your own car? You know, and they have those questions, you know, like it's only about 100 years ago that actually there was a man with a red flag, and we find that incongruous with cars. So we know that will come. We've got to go for this really interesting, challenging period of going to that particular end, really.
It'll be like vinyl. It'll come back again, driving your own car.
Yeah.
So what you seem to be suggesting, all of you, is it's not really about predicting what we want, it's about predicting what young people want, not trying to guess what someone in Silicon Valley is going to come up with.
Enabling what they want.
Yeah.
As opposed to predicting it. I mean, I think if we can provide as wide an array of travel choice as possible with a network that's reliable and solid in terms of roads, then they can make their own choices.
Isn't that just an impossible job, though? Because no 11-year-old knows what they're going to want when they're 30 and moving around. Is it just impossible to predict it like that?
I think it's more a case of making sure that we cover all aspects. So it's not just the younger ones, because they might not, you know, at 11 they don't know what they want to be, for example. I certainly didn't think I'd be sat here when I was 11. And it's also thinking about the vulnerable sectors of society who don't have smartphones and all of that technology. How are they going to meander through all of this technology? So it's really a case of making sure that that we take everyone's opinions into account, which is really difficult. And going back to Martin's question, it's making sure that all of that is covered, but seeing it as an opportunity rather than it's impossible, we'll never be able to do it. I think we've got to embrace it and tackle it, because it's happening. We are an ageing population, whether we like it or not, so we've got to tackle it. So.
There was another question.
Yeah.
Oh, a couple more. We'll go to you next, I promise.
Hi there. My name's Finlay. I work for Waze, so one of these disruptive technologies, Israeli startup. It's the largest driving community of drivers in the world at the moment. So just a view from the tech company, because I've been at Google for 6 years previously. It's just, my message to you would be, both Google and like Waze, we're looking to partner with companies that can try and help and solve these problems. We realize we can't do it alone. An example would be last month we announced that we're doing a two-way data share with Transport for London. So they tell us where all the major traffic events are and all the construction sites, and we tell them in real time where accidents and things are. Now, in America, we do this with over 100 different transport authorities in the world, and we bring them all together and they all learn from each other. And I was just going to say, I think it's, in this country, we're not the early adopters onto these programs, and yet some of the organizations in this country are very data literate. So I just think, from a tech perspective, we're open for doing business. We've got people here, and we realize we can't do it alone, and we want to work. That's the message.
I'm intrigued to know, how do you talk to people when you've got to talk? I mean, is it to literally come along to events like this and get the microphone? And so how do you get people's attention?
Yeah, it's a tough one, because if you look at Waze, which is run as a completely independent company within Google, we're a software business. We serve 65 million people every month, but there's 300 of us. So it's a very lean organization. So what we're looking to do is, when we do partnerships with people, is think, how can this scale? How many people can this actually make life better for? So clearly, that's how we think about where we put our resources. But yeah, we are making more inroads to have more people to come out and meet the right people in government and all the rest of it to play a role in this. Yeah.
Perhaps you could talk to Carla after.
Yeah, I was, hello. So I was just going to say, this is a perfect opportunity to come to one of the competition briefings that we do, because at those events, which we run with the Knowledge Transfer Network, who have a whole host of companies in their database, if you like, who would be really keen to work with a company like Waze, an organisation like Waze. And the opportunities at those meetings are, if you've got a project, you can present it and say, but I'm looking for someone who can fill this gap, or we're looking for people in this area, or other people can come to you and say, I really like your project, how can I get involved? And it's through that kind of process that you can then build your consortia and get the people like you that you're looking for. But I'm here, and my colleague Kelvin's at the front as well. I'll give him my card later.
Russell, what about the big companies? Do Fujitsu go out and look for these small companies? Presumably you buy up some ideas.
Yeah, in some instances, yeah. I personally, I'm not a big advocate for a highly acquisitive approach. I don't think there's anything to be gained by being monopolistic, certainly in our sector anyway. I'm just thinking about the example with Waze. That is the example that I was trying to allude to. It's terrifically difficult to make the relationships organisation by organisation. So the gentleman referred to creating a relationship with Transport for London, and then presumably needing to create a relationship with a whole host of local authorities, and then Highways England, and then a whole range of private sector bodies as well, everybody looking to commercialise. And that's the thing I think we would see some benefit in trying to tackle. It's this, what is it that creates an environment to let that sort of organisation flourish? And that's the very question. I think it's a good point, well made. There wasn't really a question off the back of it. For my part, that's what I want to do. I think big system integrator type organizations like Fujitsu have a kind of heavy lift role. We're there, this becomes critical national infrastructure. This becomes really important to the economy. It becomes essential that it's resilient, that it's dependable, highly available. That's kind of our role. That's the role of a big organization. The creativity and the innovation, that's precisely what I think I exist in business to help work alongside.
Another question.
Phil Carey, Reece Jefferies. I'm going to be greedy and try 2 questions, but run with whichever one holds some interest, please. First, we've heard a lot elsewhere in the conference about the benefits of the new 5-year cycle for determining Highways England investment strategy. One important side effect of that, of course, is it means there's really only a window once every 5 years. The next one really, I suppose, coming up during 2018, in which you need to determine the nature of the forthcoming investment, what should government's priorities be in the next 12 months, say, to be sure that come 2018, we're not missing opportunities to get technology properly embedded in what we're doing with roads investment from 2020? And a second question, slightly related actually, is how can we also best ensure we keep up with what's happening in the rest of Europe? Similar societies facing similar challenges, similar industrial structures, despite the risk that Brexit is perhaps sort of undermining at least the formal connections with them.
Okay, yes, Steve. Priorities for
I can give you two immediate responses to that question, Phil. One is, as you'll know, I'm going to say this, the first thing the national government needs to do is to get on and get the roads fund put on the statute book. At the moment, we have the previous Chancellor of the Exchequer's desire to create a roads fund into which all the income from vehicle excise duty will go. Within 3 or 4 weeks, we will all have forgotten who he was. His successor, fine chap, drives a Jag, may or may not honour that promise. And if we don't get that put into statute, my point is, for that period beyond 2018, beyond 2020 that Phil's talking about, I don't think we have any real confidence at all if you look back at the very up and down pattern of road investment spending by national government. So that was point one. Point two, I think it's important for the still relatively new Transport Secretary to be making it clear that in the development of the second road investment strategy, and the work is going on that now, his expectation that he will see the fruits of innovation coming through. And I think he probably doesn't need to do much more than that. Then set that and make sure that Jim O'Sullivan and his team know that they're going to be rewarded by coming up with better ideas than we've had before, including better ideas from their supply chain, because that's what's being sought.
How urgent is this funding issue? Because we haven't actually talked about it that much today. I haven't in many of the talks, but it seems to be this juggernaut coming down the road that no one's really dealing with at the moment. How serious is it that we're getting less tax in from drivers, and yet it's this backlog of repairing roads, for example, is building and building?
Well, I'm happy to go first on that, but others please
it.
join in.
Yeah.
I would say it is serious because, let's face it, the government itself has said the backlog of maintenance on local roads is £8.6 billion, which is quite a lot. And in the same sentence, didn't actually commit to do anything to make that come down. We've got a commitment on funding for Highways England that runs out to 2020, and we're all waiting with bated breath to hear what the Chancellor says next week. I think separately, the income, most people here will know, the income from fuel duty is going to decline as the fleet gets greener. There are various opinions on how quickly that's going to change, but I tend to agree. I think that between now and I'm going to say 2030, we probably need to be seeing a different mindset in the way that roads are funded, which is why the Wolfson Prize is important, about the way we think of ourselves as customers, that these things go together. I think at the moment, mostly, and I could be being cruel here, I don't think highway authorities really think of me as a customer. I suspect if I take myself back to past days in the Transport Department, I remember those of us dealing with railways tended to refer to ambulant freight, which was passengers. If we got a greater sense that there are some customers here, and the customers think that they're not just buying something, but they're buying a service level agreement of some sort, we'll just see a different relationship emerging.
Brian, can I bring you in? Have we got the skills to make this happen? We can all talk about innovation and ideas, but what we're also talking about is this huge gap in the people to actually make it happen. I mean, how hard is it for you guys to recruit the right people? What's the quality of the young people coming through like? So is it all this basically pointless talking about it because we're not training people to do it?
I think to tackle or react to, let's say, the investment that's being there, we are looking at various different mechanisms of getting graduates in, graduate schemes, but we've got to make ourselves, let's say, attractive to compete with other industries. There are a lot of other industries where graduates will come out and think, oh, actually, I would like that particular part. But within construction, within highways, or within our industry, we've got to make it attractive so it's tangible to them. And we've got to get in early. I mean, there's lots of work with STEM, which is getting into schools and educating children about maths, science and technology. So we've got to start early on that process. And it's a part of the supply chain to help that sort of feed. So then people are recognising that being an engineer, being a project manager, if necessary, is actually something that's quite forward for them.
Roads is unsexy, and I don't know why. I love roads, and I've worked in roads for years, but it's just unloved, isn't it? I mean, trains, if your train's late, you can apply for compensation, but if you're stuck in a traffic jam outside, Milton Keynes for 3 hours, what do you get? Nothing. You get a nice swish new runway and a new high-speed rail service, but actually there's this reluctance to grasp the nettle, I think, politically and everything else, because it's the problem now that won't go away. So in terms of looking at the technology, the apps, what my kids do and everything else, these people use gaming engines. They use technology all the time. They're familiar with 3D modeling. And yet if you said to them, well, go into the highways industry, they'd laugh at you. So actually, I think the institutions have got a role here to actually, if this is a word, de-silo. Okay, I see smaller, more broadly skilled project teams actually delivering services who understand whole life right at the start, and I'm not just a quantity surveyor. In fact, and I apologise in advance, but maybe it's the death of quantity surveying in 10 years' time. Brilliant. But what I mean quite seriously is that we're going to have engineers who have commercial understanding. They have understanding of whole life costs. They have an appreciation of visualisation and modelling, and they're familiar with those sorts of tools. So, the great attempts that are going on from ACOM and CIHT and others, and organisations like yourselves, Brian, I think that's great, and it's got to be accelerated, and it's got to be encouraged, and I think that's a big issue.
Do any of you think, I'm interested, Brexit's a problem? Do any of you think that coming down the line, I know we haven't mentioned it yet, but we're actually going to struggle to get the people in if we start restricting who can come into the country?
I think
no one want to go there.
I don't think it's a problem.
Go first.
I don't think it's a problem. I think I'm slightly worried about the noise around resources as well. We're talking about this great big prediction of the lack of resources in the industry, and yet we hear about people laying people off. And then the ICE turn around and say, actually, it's going to be a third less than we'd previously predicted. We have no science around any of this stuff, so we need more data, we need more predictability in terms of the workload, and that will help. But Brexit, from a personal perspective, and unfortunately the sector is dominated by white, English, middle-aged males, and the companies are all trading in the UK. So at the moment, and certainly in the next couple of years, I don't see a big issue. It may be after that.
Well, I was going to say, I think there are three aspects to this. First, I think it's likely that we're going to see challenges, perhaps not so much in this technical area we're talking about, but I just wonder if any of us is going to have any strawberries in the shops in about 3 years' time, because someone needs to do some of these lower-end jobs, and I think they're probably going to feel a pinch first. But also, we're well aware, I think, that there's a skills shortage in the logistics sector. Who's going to drive these trucks that we're going to facilitate the trips of? I think that's a worry, and I think Brexit's probably made it slightly worse. I think we definitely need a better story on universities, where some of the clever high-end engineering, we're attracting people from across the world at the moment on the basis that they come here and they might work here for one of your companies for a year or two, and they're being told, no, you won't. So I think that's a worry. But on the other hand, it's easy to get into a sort of spiral of misery, which I think some commentators did a while ago, with the 5th largest economy in the world. It's got to get pretty bad before it gets bad. And I think we need to play up. 5th largest economy, huge opportunities here. If you're a high-end engineer, boy, have we got some important problems for you to solve.
Let's do a bit of looking into a crystal ball. Russell, you were talking about mobility as a service. I hear that phrase a lot, but what will that look like? What do you actually mean? Because I'm not sure I quite understand it. So what does the person in 10, 15 years' time, how do they get around? How does this change?
So I work on an office in Baker Street in London, and I work for a company whose headquarters are some way into the middle of Tokyo. And I think mobility as a service is the service that, if I were, heaven forbid, to be called into the headquarters at short notice, it'd be a simple, I've got to go to Shiodome. And I don't really know whether it's going to be a driverless car, or whether it's going to be an Uber, or whether it's an existing taxi service that collects me at the door. And I don't know whether it takes me to Victoria train station or to to Paddington because I don't know whether it's going to get me on Heathrow Express or Gatwick Express, and I don't really know what airline it's going to connect me to. It does know my personal preferences. It knows a load about me. It knows what I like, whether that's how much I'm willing to pay or what my preferences might be for my meal en route. But it drops me off at the other end, and there's a train, car, autonomous vehicle, whatever mode of transport it is, takes me into central Tokyo and then takes me to the office. And hey presto, I'm there in time for my meeting because it's integrated with my Outlook calendar, etc. It's diverted me around congestion. It's accommodated the fact that the train in Tokyo was delayed because there was some awful unpredicted event en route. I think that implies that there's a whole load of commercial relationships that depend on mobility as a service. There's a whole load of technology involved. There's a whole load of data. In reality, it's not at all beyond the bounds of existing technology, which is why I don't think we're horizon scanning way into the future. I think the thing that turns on its head is that gets consumed as a service. Instead of the consumer having a relationship with all those individual entities, the people who run the transport network, roads investment in new rolling stock and car parks at respective airports, it'll be the people who provide the service, not the people who provide the vehicles.
Do you all have a feeling that this is inevitable, this kind of using your mobile phone, not owning a car, going from door to door, that sort of future everyone's painting? Is it just inevitable because it's driven by what people want and it's clearly convenient?
I think it's driven by what some people want, and it could become convenient. So my version of mobility as a service is multimodal travel made easy. That would be the simple version. And the complicated bit is, well, what's the commercial proposition that sits behind that then? So if I'm to sit just off Baker Street and tap into my phone, I want to go to Tokyo, where's the system integrator who's going to work out the many permutations of how I could get from Baker Street to the center of Tokyo by many different modes, and then suggest to me which one is the best? All of those companies are going to have had to make their trip options available to the integrator and their prices available to the integrator. And at the end of that, well, maybe I won't own a car anymore, but I suspect quite a lot of us are going to own one in some form or another anyway. But I think it might be interesting to just test on a show of hands who owns a car in this room. And when I say owns, do you own it like I own my house, which is, well, I live in it, but a bank owns my house? Who actually owns their car outright? There's quite a few still.
I'm interested. Who doesn't own a car? Exactly, the young people at the back. It's interesting.
I think with the mobility as a service, I think it's not a case of it's going to happen. It already is happening. It's just that we haven't named it as such yet. And I mean, in Sweden, for example, you can buy packages of mobility as a service. So you can pay X amount each month, and that will buy you so many taxi rides, autonomous vehicle rides, bus rides, train rides, instead of you using your car. So this kind of thing is existing already in other countries, and will more and more here, and to some extent already is here. It's just we haven't quite titled it yet.
Fascinating discussion. Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming. I'll just wind up with doing a few thank yous, because this is obviously the end of our time here in this theatre. So thanks to all the sponsors across the event. So notably in this theatre, Mott MacDonald, Arcadis, the supper sponsor from last night, Thales for mind mapping, ACOM for the voting system that we all used, and the individual session sponsors, so Burgess Salmon, Fleur, Costain, Matchtech. Highways UK not quite done yet. There is a final keynote conversation on the Burgess Salmon stage with Isabel Dedring, former London Deputy Mayor for Transport, now Global Transport Leader at Arup, economist Bridget Rosewell, and the entertaining Julian Glover, who you've probably seen yesterday in his capacity as Director of the 2017 Wolfson Economics Prize. Probably another plug for the prize, but it's open to individuals, as you might know, £250,000 at stake. It could be you, as they say. So thanks and well done to Highways UK, pulling out all the stops as usual to deliver what we think has been an exceptional event. I think it's met expectations and way beyond, actually.